Okay. So we're going to go ahead and open our notes on this, our 3.4 reading Enlightenment notes. And I want to help you guys fill these out. For any of you who maybe missed one, or you struggled with it, or you didn't find it, or honestly, for those people who didn't want to do it the first time, I'm going to take away your excuse for not knowing this. We're going to go over this. I'm going to lecture on this. And all you have to do at this point is copy down what I said. Now, how is this fair for the people who did the activity as homework like I directed? I'll explain why. It's fair because those people are going to do well on the quiz. Those are going to do well on the test over this stuff because they saw it twice. The people who waited for me to go over this, they're only going to see it once. And seeing it once is not enough. Okay? They will not remember very much of it. Their quiz grade will suffer. So, without further ado, I do want to get into this. I have a copy of this up as a PDF that I'm going to use to write on here.
Speaking of taking away excuses, if you haven't done the 1.6 practice problems in algebra, I would definitely do those. And there is a video that I posted on YouTube, and I posted the link in Google Classroom of me working out every single problem. So if you needed help with those, that video explains how you got the answers.
Is the PDF showing up in my share?
The doc is paired up.
Okay, so I'm gonna stop share and reshare here, guys. I don't know why it does that, but when I switch between, there we go. When I switch between apps or applications, whatever, it does that. What's this doing? Why is this being, oh, this is being fun. My power cord's being really, 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 really fun right now. You know what? Don't need a power cord. Yeah, but it, I feel like it works fine. I don't know what it is. I don't know. We're gonna fix it though. Okay. Now I have power. And I'm gonna move my mic up here to the lecture position above my head on this cable. Hopefully you guys can still hear me. Okay. So we're going to start this out. It's on page 550 as I gave it to you guys, but it's actually on a different page that my book got closed, so I got to pull it open. This is how we start strong. We start strong. The age of absolutism. Absolute monarchy in Russia. There we go. We start in the textbook. On page 550, it says Enlightenment ideas spread. France, Paris, the heart of the Enlightenment. It drew many intellectuals and others eager to debate new ideas. Reforms that were proposed one evening were the talk of the town the next day. Enlightenment ideas flowed from France, across Europe and beyond. Everywhere, thinkers examined traditional beliefs and customs in the light of reason, and they found them flawed. Even some absolute monarchs, that is, kings and queens, experimented with Enlightenment ideas, although they did draw back when they saw that those ideas threatened the established way of doing things. So what we're going to see here is new ideas spreading in the way people react to those, okay? That's what this section is about. So the last section we talked about what those new ideas were. Here we're going to talk about how they spread and how people reacted to them. First question is, how did Enlightenment ideas spread? To start with, Enlightenment ideas spread very quickly. They spread quickly, okay, among, sorry, I have some notes on my notes here. Among the educated. Educated people spread these ideas very quickly. And educated people tended to be wealthy people. Public education wasn't a thing at the time necessarily. Okay. The educated people read very widely. This is Mr. Wayne making notes. for us here, making some drawings. They read very widely. They didn't read just Diderot's encyclopedia, but they were reading pamphlets that talked about new ideas, new exciting ideas. There would be pamphlets that said on government, and they would suggest a whole new kind of government that we should adopt. Okay. And so these ideas spread by reading. Okay. But there was another way that they spread we're going to talk about as we go on here. Okay. Before the Enlightenment got to people, before this idea got to people, they accepted a whole other way, a whole other lifestyle, a whole other way of living. Okay. During the Middle Ages, Europeans had accepted, without question, a society based on divine right rule. They accepted a strict class system. That means if you were upper class, you accepted that. If you were lower class, you accepted that. Okay. And another thing I don't have room for, I'm going to write it here. Sorry. They accepted suffering in life with a promise of rewards in afterlife. Okay. The book puts it a little bit differently. They say heavenly rewards for earthly suffering. But I'm not going to try to pick on any given point of view or style of believing that. It's enough to say that people believed if they were good and they worked hard and they didn't complain about how hard life was and they just suffered through it, that at the end of their life, in the next life, in the afterlife, whatever they believed in, that they would be rewarded for that. This was accepted without question, okay, until it wasn't, until the Enlightenment came along. Okay, I'm going to move on. Once I see in the chat, you guys have the notes on this that you want. Okay, once the first person says go, then I'll wait for people to say stop. If anyone says stop, I will stop. Okay.
3 goes.
All right, 3 goes tells me to go. If you need me to stop, do it before I hit clear here. Cool. Moving right along. What is censorship and how did authorities do it? As we read on, we see writers face censorship. Most authorities felt that they had a sacred duty to defend the old order. Not everyone agreed with the idea of replacing the values that existed. Okay. A lot of authorities believed that God had set up the old order. To protect against attacks of the Enlightenment, they waged a war of censorship. Censorship is restricting access to ideas and information. And it is a terrible, terrible thing in the opinion of someone like me. Okay? Restricting ideas. Sorry, restricting access to ideas. Sorry, I'm not looking right at my notes on some of this. Goodness sake. to ideas and information. How did they do it? To protect against the attacks of the Enlightenment, they waged a war of censorship. They banned books and burned them and imprisoned writers. They banned and burned books and they imprisoned writers. If the book didn't agree with what they were trying to teach, like, I don't know, like Diderot's encyclopedia, they might try to arrest someone like Diderot. Okay? Why did they wage a war of censorship? We can go back earlier in this paragraph. It tells us that they felt a duty to defend the old order. They felt a duty to defend the old order. We talked at length during the scientific revolution about the Catholic Church and how it was a very powerful entity. It was a very powerful thing that a lot of people felt a lot of loyalty to. This is the old order. And the people within the church and the people in government, they felt like they had to predict the old ways, or protect the old ways. They had to guard it against these new crazy ideas of freedom and liberty, crazy ideas that people have a right to life and they have a right to their own property, and that we can't just take things from people. Okay? So they felt a duty to defend the old order. They didn't agree with replacing old values. Okay? Why? About this time of day, I do this and I stand here and say, man, I've got deja vu. And it's just that I've given this lecture enough times, and I literally gave one earlier today, and I've given lectures like it, and it all just seems very, very familiar. It's not deja vu, it's just familiar.
I understand the feeling. Also, hi, Javante.
Hey, Javante, glad you could join us, buddy. Yeah. All right, I'm going to move on when you guys say move on. Summer's like, let's do this. I did this activity when you asked me to, so I don't need to stand here for 2 days writing it down. I understand, Summer. Okay, clearing it out. What are salons and who would attend them? Well, let's stop for a second and let's look at the word salons, right? You guys have heard the word salon. When you hear it, when you see it, you think beauty salon, right? Hair salon. You might think of the word saloon, which is like a type of bar, like an old Western saloon. The guy walks in with the swinging doors and the whole. All of this comes from the French word salon, which is basically, it comes from the Italian word sala, which is like this big grand hall in the beginning of a big palace or house where you would receive guests, and the guests would come in and you'd like party. So these salons were rooms in these French noble people's houses, but what they really were gatherings of people. And we're going to talk about that now. Okay. So a salon. Salons are social gatherings Okay, they did not respect the whole COVID-19 separating 6 feet apart thing, right? They would sit around rich people's dining tables in these great big rooms and they would talk about this stuff. Social gatherings where writers like Voltaire, okay? Artists, musicians, I say musicians, but I should say composers, okay? And philosophers and others, like noble women. One of the big groups of people who attended these salon discussions, they would be the wealthy women, okay? And they exchanged ideas. It started out as entertainment. Okay, they would come into these salons and it was a time to eat some little tiny sandwiches and drink some tea or coffee or champagne or whatever they were drinking. And they would kind of party. And it started out with poetry readings. It began with poetry readings. Among noble women, that is, rich women. They started out by reading poetry, and pretty soon, after inviting a poet, they would invite a composer to play some music. And after they invited a composer, the composer might know an artist, and the artist would come in. The artist had these cool ideas that they tried to express in their art. And then those cool ideas would bring along a philosophe, a person with these political ideas, these philosophies. And people would sit around and they would basically talk politics. Eventually, it turned into sitting around talking politics. This also took place at coffee houses, okay? Which later on, we went from the salon of people's homes. And as it became more and more common for common people to do this stuff, they would do it in a coffee house. And this is one of the times and places in history where coffee got really popular, okay? Philosophy nerds love coffee. That goes way back. That's an old tradition, okay? And it began with poetry readings among rich women. Some of the composers that they would invite to their houses, the most famous of the composers that they would invite to their houses, okay, were some of these people we're going to talk about. But the Enlightenment inspired them. They were inspired by this hope that came from the Enlightenment. This is the music that we now call classical music. It began around this time. Sometimes we call it Baroque or Rococo, but it's classical music to us. Okay? Among them were Johann Sebastian Bach. Bach, or as Mr. Wayne might say, Bach. Okay? Bach wrote something known as the Messiah. It was probably his most famous work. There was another composer named Franz Joseph Haydn.
I will just say that I will not be slandered. I would not pronounce Bach's name as Bach.
Yeah. Mr. Wayne earlier today told me that he looked everywhere in the book for this name, but couldn't find it. I told him he must be Haydn.
Can't steal my jokes.
Yeah, I just stole his joke. Listen, if I can deliver it better, I can steal it.
But you didn't.
Another of these guys, he had a close friendship with another famous composer known as Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, or as some people with absolutely no culture might say, Wolfgang Mozart. Okay, this is Mozart. Okay, there was another guy listed in here, and I didn't read it I didn't find it in the right spot. But I don't want to dismiss him because he was also important. There was a guy by the name of George Friedrich Handel. And his name is spelled like candle if you don't know how to spell. Okay? It's supposed to be L-E when you're talking about what you pull a door open with. But his name was Handel. Anyway, they're famous composers. Their music is, so classical music is at the root of the beauty of the sounds that we hear today. Rock music is based on, when you follow it, trace it back far enough, it's based on classical music, okay? And a lot of the music we listen to today is based on rock music. This is not a music theory class. Mr. Wayne could go at length on this, but I'm sure he would probably agree that when we trace music back to the good part of its beginnings, a lot of it comes back to this classical stuff and the Enlightenment that inspired it. So if you really like that hot new artist whose album is going to drop tomorrow, you can thank Bach, Haydn, Mozart, and Handel, and the Enlightenment that inspired them. Okay, I'm ready to move on in the notes. Just tell me stop if I need to stop. I doubt that I need to stop because that was a short list there at the end. It's tough to breathe in this mask right now. I don't know. A little headache going. Okay. Moving forward here. What is a novel and when did they come about? So the Enlightenment inspired lots of people to be expressive and creative. All right. Freedom, emerging freedom among people tends to do that. So as people become more free, they tend to become more expressive. By the 1700s, literature developed new forms and a wider audience. Middle-class readers, this is not rich people, they like stories about their own times told in a straightforward way. One of the results of this was the outpouring of something called novels, which are long works of prose fiction. A novel is a long work of prose fiction. All right? Explain what that means in a second. Long meaning, you know, it's 100 pages or so, or more. More than 80 pages, I'd say. 250 to 500 pages. I think earlier ones were probably shorter, though.
Yeah, we would consider those novellas now.
Yeah, nowadays we would call it a novella, but early novels were not as ambitious as the ones today. Some of the novels that Mr. Wayne and I read are literally 2,000 pages. The whole Game of Thrones thing, it's very, very long prose fiction. But when I say the word prose, I mean that it can't be sung, okay? Prose is straightforward language, like you talk to people. It's spoken. So it's not poetry. Right? For example, a short story in prose would be, the man went down to meet the princess and he took her hand and they got married. But in poetry, it would flow, it would have a beat to it. It would be, the gentleman went down and there he met the princess. They ran off and became married. Okay, there's a you know, a meter to that. It's what we call meter. But prose is in a speaking voice, and this is what people were focused on at the time. This is what common people really liked. And when did they come about? Well, it said at the beginning of this paragraph, they came about by the year 1700. Okay, by the 1700s. What I mean to tell you is all of the literature you've probably been exposed to, almost all of it that you've seen has been like novels, okay? Most of it has been novels. But novels haven't been a way that stuff was told throughout history. Before novels were a thing, if someone was telling a story, it probably rhymed. And it probably wasn't straightforward. It wouldn't just say what happened. It would use all this flowery, symbolic language to try to make its point. Novels were,
language.
I'm sorry?
Flamboyant language.
Flamboyant language, yes.
Very
flowery or fiery language that they would use to try to make their point. And everyone kind of understood that, hey, they don't mean this literally, but that's exactly what I'm trying to say is novels were a new way where people would tell the story literally, even if the story was fiction, even if it weren't true. Okay. So this is a new art form when it comes to expression, written expression. Our questions asked us to go back and read about censorship. Okay, because we kind of skipped past the paragraph there. It asks, how did philosophers disguise their work so that it wouldn't be censored? How did they keep it from being censored by the people who wanted to protect the old order? So we're going to flip back to page 551. It says, to avoid censorship, philosophers and writers like Montesquieu and Voltaire sometimes disguise their ideas in works of fiction. Okay? They disguise their work in fiction. What's this mean? Well, we'll talk about that in a second. So if they lived today, they wouldn't say, oh, Donald Trump is awful, blah, 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 blah. Okay. Instead, they would write a book of a work of fiction. They would write a novel, I guess. And the main character would be, an older man, kind of heavy set.
Slight orange tinge to his skin.
Orange skin, a comb over. And they would make it just like Donald Trump, but they would name him like
Mr. Burns.
Mr.
Burns.
Mr. Burns, or what would be like a fake Donald? What's another way of saying Donald? Like a Danny Trump, but they would call him like Danny Grump or something. And then they would go on to make a fool out of this character in their fiction again and again and again.
Or Biff Cannon.
There were a lot of.
It was modeled after Donald Trump.
Yeah, there's a lot of ways to poke fun at our president, but the point is that at the time these philosophers would disguise the way they felt about these people. They'd say, well, this guy's a buffoon, but they wouldn't talk about that person literally. They would put it in their fiction. They would disguise this in their fiction, and we could do the same thing for Joe Biden. We could do like an old grabby old guy who was kind of sleepy all the time, and that would be a way that they would mock him or try to make fun of him. Okay, I'm not picking on one political party here. It'd be fun too. I have points of view. I'm not here to do that. Yeah, sleepy what?
Sleepy Mo Dryden.
Yeah, sleepy like Jim probably. Jim is like the other Joe. It'd be Jim Dryden or something. It would probably rhyme or whatever, but they would poke fun using fiction. Okay. Montesquieu wrote one called The Persian Letters, where two Persian travelers named, that doesn't matter what they were named, they basically walked along France talking about how advanced France was, but like all the things they talked about were so backwards and dumb and unfair and not at all like modern. And Voltaire wrote a novel called Candide, where the character travels around Europe and even to the Americas and the Middle East, trying to find the best of all possible worlds. And they would go to like places in the Middle East, and they would notice that, they had all these arts and sciences and these really awesome buildings, and they'd say, oh, how dull this place is. They only have 5 minarets on this building. And back in Europe, we have 1, which is the right amount we should have. And they kind of did all this mocking, and they were really dry and mean. Especially Voltaire. If you guys recall, I said that Voltaire was like the roast master. Like he was always very mean and funny and sly or wry in his critiques. It's good stuff. You want to go back and read Candide? Don't tell anyone I told you to. Okay. Some of that stuff's not written for y'all.
And
There is definitely not absolutely a link to the Project Gutenberg download of Candide by Voltaire in the chat.
Yeah, it'd be tough to read, but at any rate, the guys, I mean, they just spit fire. The modern day version of this is, the people who write movies that are trying to make some bigger point about how society should be without actually attacking our society. They just make it look silly to not do things the right way.
You mean like Captain America Civil War?
Like Captain America Civil War, which I never saw, but I assume has some commentary on treating people fairly or something.
Yeah. pretty much.
Yeah, like that. I probably went on too long about this. Next, absolutism. What is absolutism? Absolutism is a political doctrine where the monarch has seemingly unlimited power. I'm not even going to make you write all that. I'm just going to say monarch, unlimited power. This means the king gets to decide to do whatever he wants, or the empress gets to decide to do whatever she wants, and no one has any authority to question her. This is absolutism. We will talk a lot more about absolutism as we move into our French Revolution unit, which is the next unit we're going to do. The whole thing is about the fall of absolutism. Okay. The next section is about, the next question is about an enlightened despot. We talked really quickly about despots in an earlier lecture, in the lecture over the philosophy in the age of reason. I was trying to remember what number that was called. I think it was 3.3 lecture. Philosophy in the age of reason. We talked about a despot. An enlightened despot is an absolute monarch that embraces some Enlightenment ideas. Okay? So this is someone who has power. Who embraces or uses some enlightened ideas. Enlightenment ideas. From the textbook, it says absolute rulers who use their power to bring about political and social change. Enlightenment ideas like political, social justice. Imagine, if you will, someone who has absolute power, that they get to decide what happens. They have all this power. There's literally a king. But from their position, they can see the world isn't fair and that it should be. Imagine this. Okay? That's what an enlightened despot is. Despot means that they're in charge and no one can question them. Enlightened means that they see that that's unfair. There are a couple. One of them was Frederick II, also known as Frederick the Great. He exerted extremely tight control over his subjects during his reign as the King of Prussia. Prussia with a P. Not Russia, but Prussia. He's the King of Prussia. He ruled with kind of an iron fist, okay? Still, though, he considered himself a first servant of the state. He considered it his job to serve his people by ruling them so strongly, okay? He openly praised Voltaire's work and invited several French intellectuals of the age to the country. Some of his first acts as king were to reduce the use of torture and allow a free press. So he did. He reduced torture, which is kind of funny to think, oh, reducing torture, how noble of him, how nice of him. But that was actually a pretty big leap, because before, people like him would say that, well, like, no one questioned torturing people that they thought were bad. Okay? He allowed free press. Very important thing he did, though, was he tolerated religious differences. So he advocated for religious tolerance. People like Voltaire, they rubbed off on him. He was tired of being mocked for being a hypocrite, for being corrupt. And so when he read things by people like Voltaire, he says, this guy's right. Like, how am I doing this to people? And he would listen to them. He would listen to them. His religious tolerance and his disdain for torture showed Frederick's genuine belief in Enlightenment reform. In the end, however, he desired a stronger monarchy and more power for himself. So even though he saw that his position with absolute power was unfair, he couldn't find a way to give it up. He couldn't find a way to give that away, or he couldn't find anyone that he could trust with power, or any system that he could make it so that power was shared fairly. So in the end, he sought to get more power. And that's actually the answer to our next question here. I'm moving on unless you guys have an issue with that. Sweet. Now, how did he not support the Enlightenment? He worked to, how did I put it here? How did they put it here? He worked to have a stronger monarchy. Remember, at the beginning, we said that he ruled with kind of an iron fist. Okay? He ruled as an absolutist. It was kind of funny because he was such a strong man. He was all about, you know, I think we should have a little more freedom. We should quit torturing people. But he wouldn't say that like, hey, we all got together and agreed we should stop torturing people. He was like, look, I'm in charge here. I'm telling you, we're not torturing people. So he did that as an absolutist.
Mine cut out for your bit. I'm not sure if there's it or.
Yeah, my thing just said connection was being rickety. At any rate, he ruled as an absolutist. And he was about some freedoms, but not from a position of equality. He was about freedoms from his position as the absolute monarch. Catherine II, also known as Catherine the Great, was the Empress of Russia. Russia with an R, without a P. Russia. She was the Russian empress. What's really interesting about Catherine II or Catherine the Great, I think, lots of historians think, that probably she came to power after murdering her husband, the emperor. Anyway, Catherine the Great was the Empress of Russia. She read the works of the philosophe and exchanged letters with Voltaire and Diderot. She praised Voltaire as someone who had fought for the united enemies of humankind: superstition, fanaticism, ignorance, and trickery. She believed in the Enlightenment ideas of equality and liberty. Or so this author says. Yes?
How'd you tell him?
That'd be a good research project. I watched a series on this it was like a work of historical fiction. So it dealt with this, and I think his official cause of death was like literally like he was on the toilet and had a stroke. Like that's how they listed it as the official cause of death. It was a whole thing.
Why did she look like Susan?
Well, it's possible that Circe Lannister was modeled after her. But she did. She believed in liberty and equality. How did she do this? She abolished torture and she established religious tolerance in her lands. Okay? One of the things she did, which is really outstanding or really revolutionary in the world, and one that I probably shouldn't not mention, is she, how did they put it here? Criticized serfdom. She criticized serfdom. What is serfdom, Mr. Man? Well, I've never heard of that. It's just a different kind of slavery. Okay. Slavery is not just one kind where people are bought and sold and they go with whoever buys them. Okay. That's what we call chattel slavery. Chattel slavery is what we know about from the American South before the Civil War, where human beings would be bought and sold as personal property, like a handbag that could be taken where you want it, or where you want them, I guess. Serfdom is slavery with extra steps. Serfdom's like this, okay? So say I'm a noble and I want to sell my land to Mr. Wayne, who is another noble. That's cool. But when I sell my land, the people who live there, they're part of the deal. If I sell my land to Mr. Wayne, then he gets the people who live there, the people who farm it for me. He gets my employees. He gets my serfs, my slaves. And serfs were not allowed to leave the land that they lived on without extra permission from me. Okay? If they were caught, they'd be dragged back just like a chattel slave. Basically, serfdom is what happens to chattel slavery after it's gone on for a long time, after it gets established. Pretty soon you don't start, buying and selling people and taking to different places. You just buy and sell the land and the people are expected to stay put. Anyway, Catherine II said, enough of that. That's not cool. You can't do this to people. It continued to go on in Russia for a time after this, but she was one of the early critics of this. Catherine the Great was a friend of Voltaire, and they exchanged letters a lot. But they eventually had a falling out. They had a difference of opinion because she did some things that did not seem to support the Enlightenment. For one, she didn't actually outlaw serfdom, which is what Voltaire sort of was trying to convince her to do. And we'll see that here. Catherine, she did lots of things to carry the Enlightenment forward, but in the end, her main contribution to Russia was an expanded empire. Okay, so she showed that she didn't really believe in the Enlightenment because she expanded the empire. So I told you guys at the beginning, what we were going to do in this lecture is we were going to talk about how the Enlightenment ideas did not just arise all of a sudden and stay in one place, that they spread. The Enlightenment ideas, they moved throughout the population. And they started out with some of these people in the upper crusts of society, some of the people in the upper classes, having these neat ideas about what a government should look like. Okay, people like Montesquieu had an opinion about the best kind of government. And those ideas started to be shared among the upper classes in writings like Diderot's encyclopedia or encyclopédie. Okay, and they would get spread that way. But pretty soon people were having parties where they would literally sit around and talk about what they read from Voltaire or Montesquieu. Okay, and these parties, they inspired lots of new music and lots of new art and things that we see in the Baroque style and the Rococo style. And they spread far and wide this way. Remember, we said that with Diderot's encyclopédie, this book was published and translated into other languages, and it spread far and wide to places like Russia. Okay? But not everybody liked these ideas. Okay? Oh, I should back up. I should say that one of the ways that these ideas was spread was in new forms of art, like novels, okay, where we had a a pretend Donald Trump kind of character, right? We wouldn't actually talk about the person that we're criticizing. They would talk about some other character that does the same thing as the person we're criticizing and make fun of them. This new art form spread these ideas far and wide, but not everybody liked this. Some of the people who experienced this, some of the people who came into this, they would find these new ideas repulsive. They hated it. They thought that the old order, the old traditions, and the old ways that things were supposed to be needed to be protected. So they would burn these books, they would ban these books, and they would imprison the people who wrote them. Okay? Because they believed that the old order was established by God or some other religious influence. In the end, these ideas came to some very powerful people who had a hard time. I'm sure they had some internal struggles denying Enlightenment ideas like liberty. Okay? And people like Frederick the Great, Catherine the Great, they wrangled with these ideas. They fought with these ideas internally with themselves. And the lives of the majority of people began to change slowly. And the Enlightenment will point us towards more and more common people getting these ideas and embracing these ideas. And this will lead us to our next unit in history class, the age of revolutions, when people start to get rid of kings and things like that. But I'm not going to spoil that now. We'll leave that for the next lecture.